Welcome, welcome, welcome into the space all.
Good morning.
Just a few notes. We have everyone muted right now. Only the speakers for this morning will be able to unmute themselves. I also have the chat going to me, so if anybody has any questions, comments, observations that they like to share. There will be a period where I will open up the microphones for folks to unmute themselves at the end of at the beginning libation ceremony so that we can honor those that we have lost and have transcended. But for now, welcome, welcome, welcome. We have a number of individuals here with us today to share with us as we celebrate and honor Juneteenth. I'm just going to do a couple different things here. Michele, could you also be of service by in the background admitting people as they join in?
Yes.
Thank you so much, because otherwise I'm doing 15 things at once. And as the guy that teaches mindfulness, I want to be present as possible. So welcome, good morning everyone. My name is Juan Carlos Piñero. I am the Assistant Director of Student Involvement for Leadership and Multicultural Programs here at our wonderful Westchester Community College. And I say here because your home, your embodiment is part of this college community. And when we come together, for me, that is Westchester Community College. I want to tell you a little bit about some events that are taking place this summer through our multicultural events out of our department. And then I'll tell you a little bit about how this event came to be, and then we'll shift into opening with a libation ceremony, which I'll explain in the beginning what that is for those that may not have heard that term before. This Monday, we honored Flag Day with Josh Gassion and Travis Melby out of Student Support Services and Veteran Services Department out of our college, where they shared about the history, the symbolism of the flag, and the work that they both as veterans did to honor the flag. We saw a flag retirement ceremony, and they answered questions of the college community as to why it is important to honor our American flag. On Wednesday, we have a fun event called Summer Solstice. It's taking place at 7 p.m. Summer Solstice is the longest sunlight day filled of the year here in this area, and we will be celebrating by having a yoga teacher lead us through a relatively mild yoga experience, setting intentions for the rest of the year. She is a social activist and yoga teacher, and so she will be talking about social activism, living as an African American female in today's world, and also how to use practices to be mindful and present and healthy and well in today's world. So I encourage folks to tune in. Information will be going out via emails and via social media. Today came about years ago for me, and I'll share. I experienced Juneteenth at about 18, 19 years old. I was there to perform, and I remember going, and originally it was just an opportunity for me to perform. I was a spoken word poet for 12 years. And I got there and I looked around and I said, I didn't know about this. Why don't more people know about this? And as I walked around, people told me, exactly, that's why we're doing this event. And so I committed myself to engaging with Juneteenth once a year because it is important to honor the realities that have happened in our world, the realities that are experienced by enslaved peoples, and the reality of the ending of systemic chattel slavery. And I'm overjoyed and honored to know that a few months ago when I said, okay, now I'm ready, I've been at the college long enough, I want to do a Juneteenth celebration. It's gonna be on the lawn, we're gonna have food, we're gonna have vendors, we're gonna have music, we're gonna have performers, it's gonna be great. And then the world said, I have other plans for you, Juan Carlos. And so here we are today, gathering as a community virtually to honor this day, this holiday. And I am overjoyed that it's the day after learning that our state is starting to acknowledge this day more formally as well. So I'll begin now by taking a brief moment to share with you what will be occurring today so you have an idea, since I'm not passing around a program. And then we'll begin our experience for this morning. So this morning, you will have the opportunity to experience a libation ceremony to honor those we have lost and have been taken from us. We will have opening statements from our CDO, Renardo Reddick. For some of you, this may be the first time you see him. He's an amazing human being. I'm glad to have him here be a part of this experience. Afterwards, we'll watch a short mini documentary on the Black National Anthem, learn a little bit about a history, and then we have the opportunity to sing it and read the words of it on the screen. We will have a presentation by history instructor, and I'm sorry if I butchered that, Carla DeBose, a formal presentation on Juneteenth, its history, what it is, and some engagement too from that experience. And we will have a spoken a poem from Free Flowing, someone that's very dear to my heart, who was at the first Juneteenth experience that I ever partook in. We will later on have a opportunity to watch again a short, very 4-minute short Juneteenth mini documentary of a group in Austin, Texas. And we will hear closing statements by a student speaker. And afterwards, we will be able to observe and learn about this amazing resource that Professor Don Simmons has created for our community. And then we'll close and we'll shift through our day. Thank you, everybody, for being here again. This morning, before we begin, I feel it prudent for us to have a libation ceremony. And I'll explain what that is, and we'll experience it as we move forward from here. Peoples of the African diaspora emphasize the importance of honoring one's community, its elders, and those that have transitioned. With this ceremony, we take the time to honor all three. An African proverb tells us that people who lack the knowledge of their past are like a tree without roots. In some spaces, when a member of a community is asked, "Who are you?" the answer is, "I am we." That is why we are here today. To honor the truths of our past, to acknowledge the realities of today, and to share the torch of wisdom that has been so graciously passed on generation after generation. So in the spirit of remembrance, we pour this libation. We pour to honor the past so that we may learn from it. We pour to honor the importance of community, cohesion, and unity. We use cool water to freshen the road our ancestors and brethren traveled to virtually connect here in both memory and or spirit. We use cool water as a symbol of the continuity of life to purify and to nourish our souls. We pour to celebrate the coming together of all that are here, both seen and unseen. During this time, we call upon our ancestors, our mothers, grandmothers, and great-grandmothers, our fathers, grandfathers, and our great-grandfathers, uncles, aunts, and cousins, the foundations of our families immortalized in our hearts. We call upon our elders, whose wisdom we seek in all endeavors, our friends who we are blessed to have in our lives, our parents who guided us along the road to adulthood, our community members, our Westchester Community College community members that create, hold, and clear space for us to share the gifts that once were shared with us. We call upon loved ones who have passed over and cannot be here today. Loved ones that have been unjustly taken from us, and loved ones that have been lost to the ravages of illusion. We ask that they be with us in our thoughts. For the next few moments, I'm going to set up the system, so just give me a moment or two, so that you can unmute yourself. In our efforts to remember and honor, I ask that if anyone would like to speak the name of someone we've lost into the space, please take a pause, unmute yourself, and do so. Each time I hear a name, I will pour this life-giving water so as to honor the life of the individual lived and shared with us. Now I'm going to go ahead and give you those capabilities. Okay.
Good morning, this is Sandra Ramsey, my friend Nigel Brown.
Dr. Dory Williams.
Edward Dubose.
Good morning, Berkeley Lane.
Oscar Green.
Good morning. Good morning, Grover Ankrum.
Good morning, Raymond Howlett.
George Melville Grant.
Marley Graham.
Alicia Simmons.
Ira Peters.
George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, so on and so forth.
Candilo Pinheiro.
Virginia Kennard, Glenn Kennard.
Don Paco.
Jonathan Van Hook. Ray Brooks.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., El Haj Malik al-Shabazz, also known as Malcolm X.
Bob Marley,
Eric Garner,
Bridie
W-
Casey, Shirley Roberts, Johnny Roberts, Lonnie Nails.
W.E.B.
Diallo.
Du Bois.
Amadou Diallo.
That was really sad.
Tony McDade.
In this moment, I ask that we all take a deep breath in as we honor those that have transitioned, the life and the memories they've left us, and then exhale out. Let's then experience 2 more of those. Take a deep breath in and a slow breath out. Last time, bringing their memories into our heart and our minds. Inhale and exhale. Therefore, we cast our libations to the north. Normally, we would do this in a space and someone would be at all corners pouring out water at all corners, but unfortunately, it's just me home today, so I'm gonna move myself around. Therefore, we cast our libations to the north, the south, the east, and to the west. We wish for everyone to be fully present in our time of growth and solidarity together. And may we all leave more blessed than when we arrived. Ashe, and all the other languages, hello, good morning, jambo, annyeong yaseo, wagwan, all the other languages we speak, I bid you greetings, everyone. I'd like to now pass the unmuting, we're calling it unmuting rather than passing the mic. Pass the unmuting to our college's Chief Diversity Officer, Renardo Reddick.
Hi, good morning, and thank you all for being here today. And I'd like to thank Juan Carlos for taking the time to have this ceremony and a chance for us as a community, WCC community, to celebrate some very important historical events. Part of what I'm going to do is really talk from the heart and talk about where we are now and where we can go. And so one of the things I like to say is that WCC selected our first Black president and first female president in 2015. But we're not done yet. As a country, we elected our first Black president in 2008 and again in 2012. But we're not done yet. Some of you may ask why we're not done yet. When you see the Jeffersons debut on TV on January 18, 1975, many people wanted their time to be moving on up. But have we really moved on up? Maybe not, because we're not done yet. Black men and people of color constantly move about their daily lives in fear. Fear of being stopped by a police officer who may have not had the best day, or a police officer who always has a bad day when interacting with Black and brown people. But we're not done yet. Fear of encountering a Karen or a Ken who without doubt will call the police without fear, or as a way to influence their white privilege. But we're not done yet. You see, in 2016, 2 of my best friends, one is Mexican, one is Vietnamese, and I were vacationing together. We decided to stop at a Starbucks, but we're not done yet. We each ordered and paid for our drinks and went to the bathroom. We each came out, waited for our drinks at the end of the counter. It seemed there was a mix-up with my order, but it was quickly fixed by the barista behind the counter. But we're not done yet. We decided to sit down in Starbucks to relax and chat, so we thought. But we're not done yet. After 10 minutes of talking, one of the workers, in this case it was a Ken, walked up and pointed at all of us and stated loudly for everyone to hear, You should be ashamed for stealing a drink. Then he just calmly left the building for the day. But we're not done yet. In that moment, our character, educational backgrounds, and accomplishments didn't matter. Only the color of our brown skin, as we were the only people of color in the entire building. But we quickly found our voice and advocated to the regional manager that people like us should matter. But we're not done yet. People of color struggle to get ahead and overcome the inequalities of jobs, home, healthcare, education, entrepreneurship. Because the game isn't set up for us to achieve our dreams without obstacles or constant rejection. But we're not done yet. Unfortunately, there are many times in which our future is determined by those who don't look like or understand our history and don't really care who we are. But we're not done yet. So, the path that we're supposed to take and which we're supposed to have control of can be in one moment beaten out of us, stolen from us, without regard to our hearts, our talents, and our determination as a person. But we're not done yet. So I'm here to tell you that as a member of the WCC community, please know that you matter and that you have a voice. But we're not done yet as a community. On this day, Juneteenth, we celebrate the freedom of slaves who for more than 2 years should have been freed, but were unable due to the shackles of slavery and white privilege and the systemic racism and oppression. On this day, June the 19th, 2020, we celebrate and honor our past, but must recognize that we're not done yet. Take the time to mobilize, organize, and strategize for how you will be a voice for those who do not have a voice and be part of the solution. Remember, November is closer than you think, but we're not done yet. So I say to you, with whatever that looks like for you, whatever your heart desires, let's get it done. And let's get it done as a WCC community, because everyone matters and we all have a voice. Let's get it done. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernardo, for your words and for your truth and for speaking with us this morning. We'll now transition to observing a short video on the history of the Black National Anthem, and then we'll have an opportunity to experience the entire song. So one moment as I set this up here for you.
Talk about the national anthem lately, for better or for worse. But for African Americans, there's a national anthem that goes way back and tells our American story of struggle, triumph, and freedom.
It's a part of me, it's a part of history.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring.
It's called Lift Every Voice and Sing.
I heard it actually going to my grandma's church. I went to Spelman, so they were singing before sporting events.
Wasn't it an old slave song?
Lift Every Voice and Sing actually started as a poem. It was first recited in the year 1900 by
Hey everybody, it's Tony Robbins. Listen.
I'll pause the commercial here and I'll skip it as soon as I can. I'll make a phone call to YouTube as soon as I can as well about this. Excuse me, folks.
Stanton School in Jacksonville, Florida, as a tribute to President Abraham Lincoln's birthday. The creator of Lift Every Voice and Sing was James Weldon Johnson, a civil rights activist, lawyer, and school principal, who also wrote the poem to introduce Booker T. Washington, who was visiting his school. Johnson's brother, John Rosamond Johnson, put the poem to music, and it officially became a song. Once the NAACP adopted Lift Every Voice and Sing as its official Negro national anthem, the song took on a life of its own. A remake of Lift Every Voice and Sing was done in the 1990s by Melba Moore with fellow R&B artists like Stevie Wonder, Anita Baker, Dionne Warwick, and Bobby Brown. It was even recited during President Barack Obama's first presidential inauguration. Wherever you stand on what to actually call Lift Every Voice and Sing, chances are you fall into the bucket of people who just remember the first stanza.
Lift every voice and sing to where it. Lift every voice and sing till our.
Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise.
High as the listening skies.
I should resound as the rolling sea.
Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Is won.
Beyond the politics around Lift Every Voice and Sing, the song itself is powerful in that it talks about staying hopeful, fighting injustice, and knowing the struggle our ancestors endured.
It's a part of something that gave people hope and, striving for excellence and kind of sense of community.
Just knowing that you have a, what do you want to call that, a place, knowing that you're an individual, you're a citizen, you are here. You are here, and there's power in that.
PVP, polyethylene glycol, hooves, animal skin, sheep's wool, parabens, artificial colorants, talc, titanium.
An elder once shared with me that in order to know where we need to go, we must know where we were to have a better understanding of where we are so that we can be prepared for where we need to go. And I think that message of hope and the truth shared in the song are quite relevant to our lives today. Now I'll be sharing the song itself. There are words on the screen. I encourage you to sing along. No one is listening to you unless someone is there listening to you at home. So I encourage you to sing to your heart's content. And then we'll transition with the rest of our program this morning.
Let our rejoice. tears has been watered. We have come treading a path through the blood of the Son. Now from the gloomy past till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of the bright star is
I'd like to again thank Bernardo, our college's CDO, for sharing the message of "We're Still Not Done," the reminder. And I use this song as a symbol of hope as to where we were, where we are, and where we still need to go, and remembering to lead from a place of love. I will now pass the unmuting, pass the unmuting to instructor Professor Carla DuBose, who will be delivering a presentation on Juneteenth.
Good morning, everyone. Just give me 1 minute. I'm going to share my screen with you all. So if any of you have sat in on my classes, you all know that my approach to teaching is always to use the history of what has happened in this country and the world to shed light on where we are today. And I think this is the perfect moment. Juan Carlos has put this program together, and I think you'll find we really do have some consistent themes throughout. And so I want to sort of give a little shortish history of Juneteenth, but to also connect that history to where we presently are. So, of course, I want to start with, what is Juneteenth? It's a commemoration of the date, June 19th, 1865, when Texas slaves finally got word of the end of slavery. So why do we celebrate Juneteenth? In many ways, Juneteenth is African Americans' Independence Day, and I think that's the way we should think of it. So I just want to, as a historian, of course, I want to give a little timeline of what historically happened with regard to understanding the end of slavery in this country. So in the late 1700s, into the early 1800s, we begin to see northern states pass gradual emancipation laws. Newsflash, there was slavery in the North. I think we often think of it as a Southern phenomenon. It was not. It was an American phenomenon. It was a phenomenon all over the country. And so we begin to see after the American Revolution that northern states are beginning to pass gradual emancipation laws. There were 2 states that actually outlawed slavery outright, but the rest passed gradual emancipation laws. And what gradual emancipation laws really were laws that provided compensation for slave owners for the loss of their property, right? The institution of slavery at its heart was an institution that is an economic institution in which people were held as property, as chattel. And so we see that there were laws that were passed in northern states that provided for the freedom of slaves, but required slaves to continue on in the service of their masters for a specified amount of time for compensation for lost property for those slave owners. So free, but with some asterisks, right? So we then see Abraham Lincoln issuing the Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st of 1863 in the midst of the Civil War. But that Emancipation Proclamation only freed slaves in rebellious territories. Those were territories in the South. There were slave states that were still part of the Union that were not covered by the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, the rebellious states were the Confederacy. They had left the Union, and they weren't really listening to Lincoln's Emancipation Proclamation. And so in its effect, the Emancipation Proclamation really doesn't free a whole lot of slaves because rebellious territories weren't adhering to that proclamation. The end of the Civil War comes on April 12th of 1865. And at that point, with the Union victory, the Union now has the mechanism to begin to enforce this Emancipation Proclamation. But in the mid-19th century, communication was slow, and not every part of the country got the notice, got the memo. And so on June 19th of 1865, we have Juneteenth, which was the proclamation from a Union general reaching the state of Texas, right? The proclamation that slaves had been freed. So it's at this point effectively that our westernmost state at this point in 1865, the rest were territories, the westernmost state is now going to end the institution of slavery. But our journey wasn't reached with ending slavery until the 13th Amendment was ratified on December 6th of 1865. So we can see there's a long history in our march towards ending the institution of slavery. And I think that this is definitely why we need to be aware and celebratory of Juneteenth. So I just wanted to share a little bit of a video, a snippet from Blackish as an explanation of Juneteenth.
If the Emancipation Proclamation was passed in 1863, why weren't you free until 1865?
Well, it took 2 years for the Civil War to end.
Oh, so you were free when the war ended?
Nah, not for 2 more months because Texas landowners wanted another harvest.
That's not cool.
Well, none of it was cool. But an Army ship arrived on June 19th, 1865 and announced we were free. That's why we celebrate Juneteenth.
I am a slave and the home of the brave, a product of the triangular trade. Please pardon my ways if I'm nervous or the slightest bit skittish. In the presence of the Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, or British, they kept me in colonial chains. Tell me how to persuade them to chill or to save me if still I'm a slave.
That was not uncomfortable at all.
If the Emancipation Proclamation...
So I thought the end of the clip was actually interesting in that you have this discussion about being uncomfortable, right? Discussing Juneteenth and the end of the institution of slavery. And I think there's a legacy in this country in terms of popular history of kind of not wanting to acknowledge some of the more hairy, some of the not so pretty aspects of our nation's history. And so I think this is one of the reasons it's so refreshing to see this national embrace of Juneteenth. So the topic of freedom for Black Americans is one that I think encapsulates some of the, I guess, uncomfortable feelings when you talk about the history of this country. This is a country that has really at the heart of our nation's iconography, our sort of national ethos has talked about independence and freedom and equality for everyone, but the prospect of independence was really an illusion for African Americans for centuries. before the institution of slavery was ended, and the prospect of equality was also tenuous after the institution of slavery was ended. And so I think this idea of freedom for African Americans, both before and after slavery, is one that is contentious in our country's history. So I thought, what a perfect moment to talk about independence and what independence meant to slaves, and how slaves saw this country at its founding, particularly with documents like the Declaration of Independence and the fact that we are coming up on July 4th, right, which is the commemoration of the issuing of the Declaration of Independence. So I pulled out some quotes from Frederick Douglass's "What to the Slave is the 4th of July." It's maybe one of Frederick Douglass, right, famous abolitionist, escaped slave. It's one of his most famous speeches. So if I could get a volunteer, interactive, to just read this quote. Frederick Douglass is speaking to a group of women abolitionists in Rochester, New York in 1852. This is before the Civil War, obviously. And he's been asked to speak on July 4th about what July 4th means to the slave. So if I could get a volunteer.
I'll do it for you, Carla.
Thank you.
On the 2nd of July, 1776, the Old Continental Congress, to the dismay of the lovers of ease and the worshipers of property, clothed that dreadful idea with all the authority of national sanction. They did so in the form of a resolution. Citizens, your fathers made good that resolution. They succeeded. And today you reap the fruits of their success. The freedom gained is yours, and you therefore may properly celebrate this anniversary. The 4th of July is the first great fact in your nation's history, the very ring bolt in the chain of your yet undeveloped destiny.
Thank you, Sandra. So here we have Frederick Douglass speaking to what the 4th of July meant to these white women who were abolitionists, who he's speaking to in this speech. And he talks about the 4th of July and the Declaration of Independence as really being the foundation of independence and freedom, but he's careful to specifically say your nation's history. So later on in the speech, I pulled another quote out. Could I get a volunteer to read this one?
I will.
Thank you.
But such is not the state of the case. I say it with a sad sense of disparity between us. I am not included within the pale of this glorious anniversary. Your high independence only reveals the immeasurable distance between us. The blessings in which you, this day, rejoice are not enjoyed in common. The rich inheritance of justice, liberty, prosperity, and independence bequeathed by your fathers is shared by you, not by me. The sunlight that brought life and healing to you has brought stripes and death to me. The 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminate temple of liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems where inhuman mockery and sacrilegious irony. Do you mean, citizens, to mark me by asking me to speak today?
Thank you. So here we can see Douglass is really speaking to these women, these female abolitionists, and saying, the experience of freedom and equality represented by July 4th is your experience, not mine, as a slave, as a former slave who's a runaway. And he says the 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. In many ways, he's speaking to the way that many African Americans, both free and enslaved, felt that they were not included in the 4th of July and this celebration of independence. And I think that Juneteenth, in many ways, as we celebrate it, was to the slaves the fulfillment, right, of this promise of independence. So here I actually pulled up the actual text of the order, right? And I'm not going to read it. I just felt that it was nice to put it up here. I don't want to read the whole thing, but I want to focus. Well, actually, maybe I will. The people of Texas are informed that I just need to. In accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves. And the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness, either there or elsewhere. It's interesting because though slavery has ended, there are definitely constraints on the activities that freed slaves can have. They can't gather to really celebrate, right? So they can't collect at military posts. There's still a real concern about revolution, right? In the wake of the ending of the institution of slavery. And I think this is a theme that we see, right? That slavery, yes, was ended with Juneteenth, and we should celebrate it as an ending of the institution of slavery in the last state where that institution existed before the 13th Amendment is ratified. But still there are restraints on that freedom. So with that in mind, this idea of yes, free, but still restraints, I wanna just transition the last few minutes that I have to share with you guys about the significance of Juneteenth today. So Juneteenth signaled that the nation was on its way to fulfilling the promise began almost a century before of freedom for all people. But we must also acknowledge that despite the fact the process was incomplete for African Americans and for many others who are living in the United States. And so what we see in the wake of the ending of slavery is Reconstruction, where the country was supposed to be rebuilt and reunified. But in that process, we saw that for many freed slaves, they were free, but not really free. And that these slaves who were now free Blacks were constrained in where they could live and where they could travel and when they could congregate by a series of Black codes. And in the wake of that, we see after Reconstruction ends, the series of laws that really make African American citizens second-class citizens, with literacy tests in Southern states that prevented African Americans from voting, with Jim Crow laws that segregated Southern society by law. And this is not just a Southern phenomenon, right? We see racial violence both in the South and the North. We're a month after the anniversary of the riot in Tulsa and the burning of Black Wall Street in May of 1921. And so again, I think we should definitely acknowledge that this is not just a Southern phenomenon and that African Americans in Northern areas were also experiencing discrimination and inequality. And so we are acknowledging that, yes, Juneteenth did signal that the nation was on its way to the promise of freedom and equality, but that there was still work to do. So in the current social, economic, and political context, I just want to leave you with this question of why might it be especially significant to celebrate Juneteenth today in 2020, as we are encountering both the ways in which inequality persists and the ways in which we continue to see these kinds of issues being eradicated, right? Those boundaries being pushed. I just want to sort of leave you with that question. Does anybody want to offer an answer why it may be particularly prescient right now to celebrate Juneteenth?
Well, it could be that in as much as we have been declared free, as happened on Juneteenth, there is still a ways to go. You know, we have not yet achieved full freedom.
Yeah, Dr. Ramsey, I'm just thinking back to your presentation during Black History Month on microaggressions, right? And thinking about the ways in which we kind of still have these instances where there's sort of latent racism and sort of prejudice that comes out in these microaggressions that may seem sort of innocuous to other people, but in your presentation you showed how it really does affect those who are the recipients of those kinds of microaggressions. what about today? I mean, we're just in this, right? We are in this moment of real protest, pushing the boundaries.
If you'd
Anybody
like to,
else want to share?
if you'd like to share or answer, the mics are now unmuted, folks. If you want to unmute yourself and speak.
Can I say something? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. You gave a marvelous presentation. I didn't know anything about Juneteenth until a week and a half ago, and then I was interested in it. And your presentation made me think that Black history is American history, and it should be taught in American history classes, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Huge.
Right. In the discipline of history, I'm a specialist in African American history, but we wish there was no need to have African American history because it is part of American history. But because we don't always focus on it, as you were saying, a lot of times we don't know that aspect, that lens of American history.
Hi, this is John Nona. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
I'm on the Board of Trustees, as you all know, and I really enjoyed this presentation. And am I correct that when Reconstruction started, many former slaves, African Americans, got elected to Congress, became leaders, because the federal government kept the troops in the South, and then they removed all the troops. And then there was, the Jim Crow laws, the Ku Klux Klan, vigilantes, lynchings. After that, because we then had Andrew Johnson as the president. I'm kind of right about that, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
there were two phases of Reconstruction. And the first phase, we saw all these sort of black codes that prevented African Americans from having full equality, relegated them back to being on the plantations, working for their former masters. And then there was a second sort of phase of Reconstruction, which is exactly what you're talking about, where African Americans are elected to office, they're setting up schools, they're setting up churches, they're Black leaders, they have their own institutions that are created, absolutely. And so this idea of Reconstruction is a really important one. I think that there are now even 3 waves that scholars have identified of Reconstruction, right? The first of which is right after the Civil War. And then the second Reconstruction is the Civil Rights Movement. And that scholars are increasingly advocating for a third Reconstruction, which is what we may be seeing right now, which is challenging some of the more systemic aspects of racial inequality in this country that are often tied to economics and tied to issues of policing and mass incarceration. And so I think in many respects, we may be sort of seeing this third Reconstruction coming. Absolutely.
And I was going to answer your question. I think with the events we've seen in the last couple of months, with the person we have leading our country as the president, it's really become a time of crisis. I'm reminded of 1968. I go back that far, when we really do have a chance. I think you have a lot of white America that sees what's happening now, and they're out in the streets as well. So I think this is a pivotal point. And I just want to add one story. I've been involved in voting rights for a long time. And in 1965 was the Voting Rights Act. And in fact, in 2015, I was on Edmund Pettus Bridge with the Lawyers Committee on Civil Rights, and I saw what they had to face. But I also was at President Obama's inauguration, as Dean Riddick pointed out, first Black president. And my wife and I were there. It was very cold. We were standing next to an African-American family that drove up from North Carolina with their 2 children and the husband and wife. And we started talking, and she pulled out her grandmother's voting card and said, I had to bring this. My grandmother, her first time she voted was 1968. She's dead now, but I wanted to bring her voting card up to this great day. So that was a story that I'll never forget, that I like to recite all the time. We have made some progress, but Dean Riddick, you're right. We've got a ways to go. Thanks for hearing me out.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this program.
those personal stories is what makes history come alive, really, for us. And I think it's really significant to think of the progress that we're making in these three sort of waves of Reconstruction. I think that's a great way to frame it and what's going on, right? The connections between what happened in the wake of Juneteenth and what's happening in America today. So I just wanted to end my part of today's program with a quote from the same speech, the Frederick Douglass speech, as he was talking about what the 4th of July meant to the slave. And he says, "Allow me to say in conclusion, notwithstanding the dark picture I have this day presented of the state of the nation, I do not despair of this country. There are forces in operation which must inevitably work the downfall of slavery. The arm of the Lord is not shortened, and the doom of slavery is certain. I therefore leave off where I began, with hope." And that's where I'm going to leave off my part of the presentation, with hope that as we continue to see these waves of changes, that they will continue on in the future.
I thank you so much, Carla, and we virtually applaud you and thank you for this presentation, for speaking your truth and for sharing this wisdom that we need to be sharing. You're absolutely right. This is American history, and we need to learn this. Every child should know what Juneteenth is about and why. I will now pass the unmuting to Free Flowin'. Free Flowin' and I were in a hip hop poetry group for about 15 years. There's debates on when we officially formed. And we traveled all different parts of the world. Our mantra was learn, educate, repeat. We felt it prudent to learn, to put it into content that could be heard, that people can dance to, but also think about, and to follow the system up. And she has prepared something specifically for this day for us, and specifically for this community. When she asked me what it was about, I told her, and I said to her what it's about and how we're coming together. And she's like, oh, I want to create something totally different. So she's sharing this with us for the very first time. Free Flowin', I'm going to spotlight you in just a moment. Welcome and thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Good morning, everyone. I think it's 15, Juan Carlos, but who's counting? I want you guys to kind of go on this journey with me. I have to be honest. I was going to use something that was very, very in the forefront of my mind, but in light of most recent events, I thought it was important for me to share my internal revolution. And I think a lot of us, while we have been in quarantine, have had a lot of time to think on the matters that are really prevalent in our society. So this is just a little journey into where I was at over the last couple of days as I was getting prepared for this amazing Juneteenth celebration. And thank you all for everything that you've shared. I too was taking notes, so thank you for that information. So I will get started. I'm still trying to figure out what my lane is, which path I'm to take, and if the road less taken would take me to my destiny or another wake. Moments of silence where now all I want to do is escape from social media. Share Breonna Taylor, post Oscar Grant, like Sandra Bland, retweet Eric Garner, post Amadou Diallo, like George Floyd. All the while, my mind keeps telling me that there is no longer room for a fight or flight situation. This goes far beyond a very healthy discussion. And frankly, right now, I don't want to be the bigger person. I don't want to be rational. I don't want to be forgiving or choosing intricately woven words to express how I feel. How I feel, I cannot even begin to explain, because there is no savvy way to articulate the pain that hate creates and the scars it leaves behind while families bid their final goodbyes. I'm still just trying to figure out what my lane is, trying to fill the space between my ears that yearns to hear "nuck if you buck." So if crime mob was a feeling, that is how I'm feeling. As I slowly peel away the layers of my humanity, numb is my new charted destination, with little interest in looking in my rear view mirror. Ray-Bans on, and things are starting to look clearer. I was in a marathon facing the wrong direction. I fear that I've lived in the shade too long. I sat on the sidelines while others held the baton. I was in a race facing the wrong direction. And then that little voice in my head, longing for some direction, I found it. I started to feel my feet firmly planted in the ground, hips pointing upwards, knees gradually straightened, and head looking out. For the first time in a long time, I stand up. I stand up for the fatherless child and the widow. I stand up for those who've been standing behind broken windows. I stand up because if I stand for nothing, I will fall for everything. I stand up for equality to be more than a hashtag or retweet. I stand up because reparations is the only way to fundamentally dissolve the institute of racism. So yes, I want my 40 acres and a mule. I stand up because this is the time when someone needs something to look up to. I stand up because I've refused to be marginalized by a society that was built on the blood, sweat, and tears of my ancestors. I stand up, I stand up, I stand up. Ashe, y'all.
Thank you, Free Flowing. You're getting a huge virtual applause here. I genuinely hope that next year, Juneteenth 2021 at WCC, we can have you on campus and give you a hug. Thank you again. I'd like to, I'm going to be sharing the video that I mentioned earlier via the chat for those that want to watch later on, but I do want to give some time to our student speaker and Don Simmons, because I know we want folks to be able to transition to see Dr. Miles speak in another Zoom call. I want to introduce our student speaker for closing statements, Michaeli Elon Wallace. Michaeli is the 2020 orientation coordinator. She's one of 3 students that is overseeing a group of student leaders currently being developed at the college. She is co-editor of the Viking News, and she is the SGA Director of Public Relations. Please, ladies and gentlemen, give your hearts, give your ears to Michaeli Elon Wallace.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for being here. I wanted to say a quick thank you to Juan Carlos for putting this program together. So far, I feel, enlightened. I feel better. I've been having, it's hard to say like a great time because it's like so heavy, but a great time. And so I'll begin. I want to thank all of the speakers that spoke with intent and purpose today. I do feel more informed, and I know I am more confident in what I can bring to the conversation surrounding Juneteenth now. So thank you for that. As a student, not being taught about Juneteenth in my early education definitely shaped my upcoming years. The first time I ever heard about Juneteenth was in my junior year of high school. My friends and I went all out because we learned about the holiday from one student who was hosting a small get-together, but it ended up being like the entire school being there. It was really fun. It was really enjoyable. And they had foods I didn't even hear about before. The following year was our senior year, and Juneteenth kind of fell by the wayside. We had finals, there was prom, there was graduation. And so I never celebrated it since that junior year time. And from this day forth, I vow to myself that I will do something, no matter how small, to celebrate. I bring this up because my family emigrated here from Jamaica. I am first generation. And I grew up usually celebrating 4th of July. It wasn't really about 4th of July. It wasn't really sentimental to me. It was just a day where my family would get together, listen to music, drink, play games, and eat. And to tie it all back, now that I know better, I will do better. Today, I plan on going to my cousin's house, listening to a few podcasts, talking about what I learned today, and make a cheesecake. It's something small, but I'm doing it with my family in the name of Juneteenth. And so I think it's worthy to be celebrated. It's important to have these conversations. They're extremely relevant, especially in these times. I encourage everyone to use what they learned here today and spread the word. I've been to 2 protests now, as of recent. And for the most part, it's been a pretty positive atmosphere. You can probably go up to anyone in the crowd and they would greet you nicely. There's a little anger here and there, but justified. But you can strike up a conversation with someone and just ask them, what did you do for Juneteenth? if they don't know the origin or why to celebrate, now you know. For all of my shy people that don't like to walk up to strangers, that's fine too. You can make a sign posing the same question or even post it on social media. I implore you all to not let this conversation die with us. You know, spread the word, spread the message. Now is the time more than ever to raise your voice because your voice matters. If you don't believe me, here are a few, examples. Right now, minorities have center stage. If you look at the news, we see Black Lives Matter protest, and slowly justice is being given to grieving families. DACA got their day in the Supreme Court and won. The LGBTQIA+, we're inclusive, community is protected with the workplace discrimination. Also, thank you to the Supreme Court. And we have to use this momentum that we've garnered up in this moment, and we have to use it to enact and create more positive change in our communities. And this is the first step, being present, listening before speaking. I wanna go rogue a little bit. I sent my speech beforehand, but I took notes, so I'm gonna just bring it up real quick. I see on social media that we're putting a lot of emphasis on this is a Southern holiday. This is a Southern origins. And I just wanna say that I know we live in New York and we're a very liberal state, and we're mostly Democratic and whatnot. I just want to say that this is happening in our own backyards. Like, this is happening here as well. My first time going to the African burial grounds in Manhattan was really an emotional time for me because I didn't know what slavery looked like in the North. There was slaves in the, let's say it was an apartment building, slaves on the top floor, slaves in the basement. And I just never had a visual representation of what that looked like. I know we've all seen today the video of the NYPD literally driving over peaceful protesters. So it's just something to think about. This is not just a Southern epidemic, racism, it's also here. I want to congratulate everyone in attendance for their participation and choosing to engage in such difficult topics during this time. I know it's hard, and thank you.
Thank you so much, McKaylee. Virtual applause. We thank you for your truth and your youthful wisdom. When living through these realities, I've learned we need to listen to the wisdom of the elders, but also the fire of the young. And I thank you for bringing the fire of the young. I will pass it over to Don Simmons, who will briefly share with us a very powerful and amazing Juneteenth resource that he's created for our college community. I was giving him lots of love and gratitude before we started, and I want to thank you for doing this. If you could just walk it through very briefly, because I know folks want to transition to the next opportunity with Dr. Miles.
No, of course. I'll definitely make this short and sweet. But first, I just want to say it is kind of beautiful that there are so many people joining us in this virtual celebration. And Juan Carlos, thank you so much for inviting me to share my research guide. It's a pleasure to present this project to everyone, and thank you to the Juneteenth panelists for their respective presentations. Before I get into the research guide, I just want to share, a couple of thoughts that I had, because this opportunity for me to work on this project was very insightful and very enlightening, to say the least. I would say that I was always aware of what Juneteenth was and what the celebration meant for us as Black Americans, but to read up on the history and to understand the historical impact that Juneteenth had for Black culture and for Black history was very eye-opening. It was an eye-opening experience for me. And shout out to Governor Cuomo for enacting the executive order to recognize Juneteenth as a state holiday. I know it's a little too late, but for the fact that this is going on right now, and one day it could be a national holiday, is a beautiful thing. And George Latimer lending the helping hand, doing the same for Westchester County, because this is the first step of acknowledging Juneteenth, not only as a pivotal moment in Black history, but in American history as well. So I think that is extremely powerful. But before I start highlighting also the different sources on Juneteenth, I want to give a huge shout out to the librarians that helped me, Jessica Tagliaferro, Yvonne Rohde, and most importantly, Dean Pollard. I'm just very grateful that I'm a part of this. So let me share my screen so we can get started. Give me 1 second. All right, So this is the guide. I first gave a brief introduction to Juneteenth and how this is a monumental celebration for not only Black Americans, but America as well. And with the first tab, I talk about how, well, it gives background information to Juneteenth, and this is just a compliment to Dr. DuBose's magnificent presentation. Huge shout out to Dr. DuBose for laying out the historical context. But what I did was I gave the definition of the Juneteenth celebration with the sources to follow, and all of the links are hyperlinks, so if you click on it, it will direct you to the source itself. I also mentioned pivotal historians and other key figures within this project, like Henry Louis Gates, who is a prominent Black historian who sheds a lot of information relative to Juneteenth. So I highly recommend checking out his article. And like I mentioned, due to time, because there's a video right here that I would love to show, I would say definitely check it out on your own time because we're kind of limited right now. What I also did with the tabs, let me scroll back up. Off to the left-hand side, I addressed Juneteenth, systemic racism, microaggression, and how to make a difference. And on the bottom of each tab, well, for most tabs, I give these sources available both in the WCC catalog, which all have the hyperlink, and available sources online. So scrolling back up, I tie in systemic racism to Juneteenth because the domino effect that occurred after the celebration, obviously we see the effects of today. And I also give the definition to systemic racism in the first column. But this video in particular, published by ACTV, is phenomenal. The issue, the problem, and the historical impact of redlining, and how we as Black and brown families have, and people in general, have been the victims of redlining. And I would suggest, if you would like to know more information, check out this video. Again, there are sources below when it comes to anything within our collection that relates to systemic racism, as well as sources available online. So systemic racism is a part of this guide, but I also deal with microaggression. And with this tab in particular, there is a lead counselor of psychology. His name is Dr. Wing Su, and he's a bad man when it comes to microaggression and his work relative to the different variations of microaggression. And that is the byproduct, arguably, to systemic racism. And while I was looking for sources relative to this, I had no idea the deeply rooted issues that persist till this day, and recognizing that they're so subtle, but it has an impact on everybody's psyche and how we judge people for the subtle things. And with this graph in particular, it issues the different variations. And I also give a video, and as you can clearly see, Jim Carrey is already looking crazy, but it gives a very artful rendition of how microaggressions can go so far, and how, you know, for lack of a better term, aggressive it can be on other groups of people. Same thing, off to the left-hand side, there are the sources available online. And mind you, most of the sources also have its citations, so if you're ever wanting to use it for an MLA paper, please feel free to copy and paste the citation, it's available. And finally, the last tab that I issue is how to make a difference. I think it's extremely important to recognize that there is a problem in our country, but we can do many things to resolve this issue and to at least take a baby step forward into making progressive change, not only in our local government, but state and national government, because there are organizations that contribute towards social justice. So in this tab, I kind of introduce why it's important to make a difference. And the second tab that follows with resources, there are 5 steps that I lay out. And with each step, there is a link that gives you information on how you can do the following. So NYXT, a news cable channel, kind of introduces their readers to, you know, the 5 steps on how to make a difference. The first is consider your interests. So what are the different issues that you want to tackle. In this case, it will be systemic racism or uplifting the Black community due to the oppression that we've been, the victim of for decades and for hundreds of years. And each link will give you different, it gives you information on the different organizations you can, go to or support. With the second one, it's educate yourself. So educating yourself on the topic, which, this presentation has been a helpful resource for. And with this article in particular, this focuses on anti-racism work. So that means sources, videos, podcasts that addresses the issue at hand, the issue that we're discussing today. The third one, which is most important, reach out to legislators. Vote, 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 vote. Our vote does matter. It does make a change. So I highly encourage, especially the youth, to continue to vote, because you guys can make the difference, and we can all make a difference. The fourth one is to volunteer to your local organizations. I have the link to that as well. And the fifth step to creating forever more social change is to donate to different organizations. And I provide a link to different organizations that you can contribute to as well. I'm sorry if that presentation was a little bit rushed, but like I said, just due to time, I just want to kind of give you a highlight or a summary of what this research guide offers. And what I'm going to do as well, once I get off of this share thing, I'm actually going to provide, Juan Carlos, you're the man. So the research guide is already in the chat. And now I'm going to pass the floor to Juan Carlos.
Thank you so much, Don. I cannot speak enough to what you've just shared with us, the resource that we as educators can share. I teach at Westchester Community College, a first-year seminar. I work with students. I will be teaching at Manhattan College, and I also teach at SUNY RN psychology courses, and I will be utilizing this as a resource because I want to bring in some of these elements into my psychology courses. I thank you all for attending today. I want to share a brief story, and then I'm going to do something a little different. I'm looking for the link to Dr. Miles's presentation. I have not been able to find it. I've been in the background searching for it. I'm going to open the chat. If somebody would like to share it within the chat. I have it. Excellent. If you could share it within the chat. Wonderful, thank you. So that way we can transition. As we close, I'd like to share that years ago, I was at an event and I looked at an elder and I said, how do you keep so much hope and so much desperation? This was Dr. Margaret Wade Lewis, one of the key people in developing the Black Studies program at SUNY New Paltz that I was a part of. And she said, look around at what you're doing. Look at what you young people are doing. Look at the batons being passed. And I encourage us to look at that. On a day that we were technically off, we had about 78 people of our community come together during a global pandemic to learn about what is happening in the world, to connect and to honor those we've lost. That is powerful, that is real. And so I encourage us to, as we acknowledge the dark, we look towards the light. As we acknowledge the cracks, we see the light that comes through so that we may transcend and move forward. I thank you all for joining us. I thank you to our speakers, to Carla, to Don, to Renardo, to McKaylee, to Free Flowing, to everybody that participated. Know that this will be sent out fairly soon to your email boxes. I will be reaching out to Creative Communications so it can be shared. And the link is in the group chat if you would like to attend Dr. Miles's speech. Thank you. Have a blessed and wonderful day, everyone.